Okay, let's unpack this. Picture this. There's a standoff brewing right now, but it's not, politicians in Parliament.
Right.
It's online. You've got a government regulatory board on one side, and on the other, this really powerful, very vocal group of online content creators, influencers.
Mm-hmm. A very modern kind of clash.
Exactly.
Right.
Happening in Kenya, and it's all about who gets to control the message, really, in the digital world.
And look, this isn't just some abstract thing. We're basing this deep dive directly on our source material, which actually captures this moment. We've got excerpts from a YouTube video.
Yep.
You hear the influencers themselves reacting.
That's right. We're looking at what Kenya's Betting Control and Licensing Board, the BCLB, actually did, and then the immediate and pretty fierce backlash from the influencer community there.
Yeah.
So our goal here, our mission for this deep dive, it's really to get past the headlines and the source, figure out what the BCLB actually put in place, understand why the influencers are pushing back so hard.
And what does it tell us?
And what it tells us about that bigger picture, that friction point between, let's say, traditional regulation and this super fast-moving digital economy.
So just to set the scene a bit more, the BCLB, which operates under the president's office, they recently brought in some really strict new rules, specifically targeting gambling ads.
And it didn't land quietly.
Not at all. The source material makes it crystal clear. It wasn't just accepted, it sparked this instant, very strong pushback from influencers, celebrities, content creators.
Yeah.
They're all basically calling it pretty loudly unfair.
Okay, let's start with the government side then, based on what our source tells us.
Yeah.
What exactly did the BCLB announce, and what was the reason they gave?
Well, according to the notice that's described in the source, these actions kicked in on May 29th. They announced a whole slate of measures, and the stated purpose, well, it was framed around public health, social issues.
Okay.
The source says they want to curb irresponsible gambling and deal with what they see as rising cases of problematic gambling in Kenya.
All right, so the official line is public protection, trying to reduce harm.
Yeah.
What was the specific rule, though, that seems to have really hit the influencer community square on, the one causing the big reaction?
The main one, definitely the most controversial rule that the source details. It's a straight-up prohibition.
Prohibition.
Yeah. Influencers, celebrities, content creators, they are now explicitly banned from promoting betting companies, full stop.
Wow, okay, that's a direct hit. A huge potential impact on income for a lot of people in that digital space.
Oh, absolutely.
Were there other new rules rolled out alongside that ban?
Yes, the source mentions quite a few others, like all gambling ads, doesn't matter the platform, now need 2 approvals.
2?
Yeah, they need the green light from both the BCLB and the Kenyan Film Classification Board, the KFCB.
Okay, so doubling the bureaucratic hurdles there. What else?
Ads are also now banned near places considered sensitive. Think schools, churches, malls, even playgrounds.
Makes sense from a protection angle.
And they also explicitly forbid associating gambling with celebrities or showing it as, a way to get rich or successful.
Ah, so no more flashy cars, luxury lifestyles, implying it all came from betting.
Exactly. The source actually sums it up pretty well. It says it's no longer enough to flash cash, a flashy car, and a click the link in bio.
That really paints a picture of the shift, doesn't it? Moving away from that aspirational marketing.
Totally. Towards something much more cautious, much more regulated. And the new rules also get really specific about what has to be in an ad now.
Like what?
Things like license numbers, a customer care line, clear responsible gambling messages, and in bold text, the phrase authorized and regulated by the BCB.
So really making the regulatory presence visible.
Very visible. And based on how the source presents it, the BCLB's goal here seems to be about fundamentally changing how people see gambling. They want it viewed as risky business, as the source puts it, not this guaranteed lifestyle upgrade.
Trying to reshape public perception through these tight controls.
That seems to be the idea, yeah.
Okay, so that's the government's action, their stated reasons, focused on safety. Now, let's flip to the other side, the influencers. How do they respond to this sudden change, according to our source?
Well, their reaction was immediate and forceful. They described the directive as unfair, and they really hammer the point that from where they stand, it lacks logic.
Lacks logic. That's a pretty strong claim. What are their main arguments against this ban? What's the core of their pushback?
They lay out several key points in the source material. The first one is all about fairness, or what they see as hypocrisy.
Hypocrisy, how so?
They argue it unfairly singles them out because while they're banned, traditional media, TV, radio, print, they can still carry betting ads.
Ah, okay, so they see a double standard.
Exactly. They feel it's hypocrisy rather than regulation. It feels like they're being targeted specifically, while these other big players who also make money from the ads get a pass.
So that feeling of being singled out compared to the legacy media who've been doing this for ages.
That's precisely their point. It feels inconsistent, discriminatory to them. And then their second big argument, well, it hits closer to home, the economic impact.
Right, the money.
The money. They stress this ban doesn't just cut off their brand partnership income, it wipes out their entire ecosystems.
Ecosystems, what do they mean by that?
We're talking about the whole network, the
Yeah.
videographers, the editors, stylists, social media managers, often, younger professionals whose jobs depend entirely on these influencers getting brand deals.
Right.
They state very clearly this work is feeding a lot of people. And they say terminating is not the way forward. They seem to accept the need for regulation, but just outright termination. They argue that's not the answer.
Some mentioned it was their biggest income source, right? Or they were ambassadors.
Yeah, the source mentions specific examples, people saying this was their biggest source of income, or that they were official brand ambassadors. So it's a massive financial hit.
And that really underlines that point, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's not just a few famous faces losing money. It's potentially a whole network of people, many likely younger individuals building careers in this new digital creative field,
Exactly.
whose livelihoods are suddenly at risk. It does make you wonder if the economic reality for this newer workforce was maybe overlooked when they made the policy.
It certainly sounds that way from their reaction in the source. They feel responsible for these teams. They see the ban potentially collapsing this whole structure they've built, impacting lots of young careers that only exist because of the digital space.
Do they talk about what role the betting companies played before this ban happened, from their perspective?
Yes, they do. They argue these companies played a big role, actually, in supporting Kenya's content creation scene, the music industry, boosting artists, doing things they say the government doesn't do.
Interesting.
So there's this sense that they need to somehow compensate for that lost support now or find a way back to that relationship.
So a feeling that these firms were actually major funders of the creative economy, filling a gap, and now that's just gone, leaving a void.
That's the picture they paint, yes. And then there's the whole issue of the process itself. Did they feel involved, consulted?
Let me guess. No.
Absolutely not. That's a huge point of frustration in the source. They keep repeating. They were not consulted before this ban dropped. They even issued what they termed a 48 hours ultimatum, basically demanding the government sit down with us, send representatives, be part of the dialogue.
So they're actively asking for a seat at the table.
Very actively. They explicitly say they want to negotiate towards a model that ensures responsible advertising. They're not just saying no ban. They're saying let's talk about how to do this right.
Seeking a solution together, not just accepting a top-down order.
Precisely. And they even float some alternative ideas for regulation. They seem to think responsible advertising can happen on social media, maybe like how alcohol or cigarettes are handled, safe hours or in safe ways.
Like time restrictions or specific formats.
Something like that. And they also push back on the idea that kids are only seeing these ads on social media. They point out, hey, kids watch TV too. They see billboards. And those still have betting ads.
Right, questioning if social media is really the unique danger zone compared to traditional channels. They also mentioned other ways betting gets promoted, didn't they? Something about sports.
Yes, they call it cherry picking. They argue it's unfair to ban them when, say, players on sports teams sponsored by betting companies are basically walking billboards.
Ah, the team sponsorships.
Exactly. They mentioned SportPesa, Batika, Bet Power sponsoring big teams like Gamey FC, Leopard Police, Shabana. The athletes on those teams are celebrities too, right? Indirectly promoting betting just by wearing the jersey.
That's a really interesting point about visibility and indirect endorsement.
It is. And another thing they stress is just the speed of it all. They felt the ban was too early, too abrupt. They suggest changes like this should have been phased in, gradually. Give people time to adjust their businesses, find other income.
The suddenness seems to have really amplified the shock and the negative impact for them.
Definitely. And there's this strong undercurrent in the source, a feeling that they're being scapegoated.
Scapegoated.
Yeah, especially when they see, as they argue, the big media houses keeping their betting ad revenue. They feel like they're being made an example of, while others who profit just carry on.
So a feeling of being unfairly targeted while others benefit. Do they talk about wanting to contribute positively? using their influence for good.
Yes, that comes through really clearly. They express this desire. They say they're the ones who carry the society, who have a real impact. And they make this direct plea to the government, basically asking, show us how you want us to impact society. Don't just tell us, okay, just don't do this.
That's quite powerful, asking for guidance, partnership, not just a shutdown.
It really is. And it speaks again to that feeling of being dismissed, maybe, that their potential positive influence, the unique way they operate, isn't fully grasped or valued by the regulators.
Is there any sense of fear that this is just the start, that more restrictions might be coming down the line for them?
The source does indicate that concern. There's worry voiced that, this betting ban might just be the first step. Could it escalate? Could there be restrictions on other types of content, other brand deals? It creates a lot of uncertainty for their future.
Okay, so stepping back and looking at the whole picture from our source material, it's a definite clash. You've got the BCLB, the government body, making this move. They say it's for social protection, tackling gambling harm.
Right.
And then you have this whole segment of the digital workforce influencers, their teams, feeling like they've been blindsided, targeted unfairly, and facing serious economic consequences from a policy they see as sudden and illogical.
And this clash, it really throws that angle we talked about into sharp relief, doesn't it? The potential sort of disregard, maybe, for certain groups, especially younger people who dominate this digital workforce and the creative ecosystems around it. When you hear the influencers detail the impact, not just on them, but on their videographers, editors, managers, many likely young professionals just starting out, it really highlights how policies, even well-intentioned ones, can just steamroll the economic realities of these newer industries.
And that feeling they express of not being consulted, of being told just stop, instead of being guided on how to contribute positively, it feeds into that perception that maybe their work, their economic value, their whole way of operating isn't fully understood or respected by the traditional powers that be.
It's such a clear example of the tightrope governments everywhere are walking right now. How do you regulate this incredibly fast-changing digital world effectively?
Right. How do you balance protecting the public with, well, supporting these totally new ways people are making a living, these new professions?
And it really makes you question the fairness aspect, too.
Yeah.
Is it actually fair to apply totally different rules for advertising to traditional media compared to digital creators, especially when they might be reaching similar or even bigger audiences, including younger people?
Absolutely. And maybe the biggest lesson from this whole situation, just based on what the source shows us, is how crucial dialogue is. Really understanding the real-world effects of policies on the specific communities they impact, especially these new, evolving digital communities.
Yeah, that lack of consultation seems key here.
So why should this situation in Kenya, as laid out in our source, matter to you listening right now? Well, because it's a real, happening now example of how regulatory choices, even if they have good goals like public safety, can have massive, maybe unexpected fallout for people working in these new digital-first fields.
It shows that friction, doesn't it? When rules made for an older world crash into the reality of the digital economy and the people making their living in it, it's a challenge governments everywhere are grappling with.
So to wrap up this deep dive, drawing only from our source material, we've seen the BCLB's perspective, stricter gambling ad controls needed to fight social harm.
And then the passionate response from the digital creators. Arguments about unfairness, hypocrisy, the huge economic hit to them and their networks, and this very clear call for dialogue, for recognition, for finding a way forward together.
It's definitely complex. Lots of economic, social, regulatory threads tangled up in what the source presents. And it leaves us with a final thought, something for you to mull over, building directly on that call for negotiation we heard from the influencers in the source.
Yeah.
In this age where digital jobs and platforms are changing so fast, could meaningful collaboration, actual partnership between the old school regulators and these new digital communities be the real key? Could that be the way to make policies that actually protect people without crushing the livelihoods and the creative energy of those working in this new digital landscape?
It's definitely a question worth asking. How do you bridge that gap?
Absolutely. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive for today.